We all have a story. Your story is not my story, and my story is not yours. However, we can find joy, hope, and emotional healing even through our most painful moments in life. Let's walk and take this journey of healing together, one step at a time, because your story does not define you. Hey, y'all. What if I told you that the hardest person you'll ever have to forgive isn't someone who hurt you, but it's you? Because some of us are carrying guilt that God has already forgiven, shame that no one else is holding over our heads anymore, and regret that has become a part of our identity. And today, I want us to put some of that weight down. I want us to put that to the side. Welcome back to Your Story Does Not Define You, the podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Niesha. And as always, I want to thank you for choosing to spend a little bit of your day with me today. What's your vibe today? I want you to just take a second and check in with yourself. How are you showing up for yourself today? What have you been doing to reground yourself and refocus and put yourself in a space that feels comfortable for you? My vibe today is optimistic and excited. This week has been a heavy week so far. A lot has transpired in my personal life, in my professional life. It's been very busy. It's been quite emotionally overwhelming this week. However, my vibe is optimistic because I'm hopeful and looking forward to the weekend for some self-care, some relaxation time, and just to give myself time to kind of regroup and put myself in a space that feels good for me. My vibe is exciting because of the inaugural It Hurts to Heal, the Brotherhood Experience Men's Conference that's going to be taking place tomorrow here in Bakersfield, California. I'm super, super excited that my organization is putting that on. So I'm excited to see what's going to transpire and how lives are going to be impacted. So I'm really looking forward to that today. So remember, check your vibe because you have the power to change your vibe. There's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. Only you being able to check in with yourself and learning how to show up for yourself every day in the best way that works for you. So as we dive into this conversation today, I want to start off this conversation with asking another question, or a couple of questions rather. Have you ever forgiven someone else but struggled to forgive yourself? Have you ever replayed a moment in your mind over and over, wishing you could go back and make a different decision? Maybe you stayed in a relationship longer than you should have, or maybe you trusted someone who betrayed you, or maybe you hurt someone that you love. Or maybe you ignored your intuition. Or maybe you settled because you didn't think you deserved better. Or maybe, just maybe, you're carrying shame about something that happened years ago. And although everyone else has moved on from it, you haven't. If any of that resonates with you, then today's conversation is for you. And I hope that by the end of this conversation today, that you'll feel just a little bit lighter than what you did when you pressed that play button. Because today, we're going to be talking about self-compassion and self-forgiveness. And we're having this conversation not because our mistakes don't matter or not because accountability isn't important, but because healing cannot fully happen while we are still sentencing ourselves to a lifetime of punishment. So let's talk about laying those things down that we've been carrying far too long. I want us to talk about how we can put those things to the side because remember, we all have stories. And even though our stories may explain where we've been or what we've been through, our stories do not define who we are. So let's talk about it. One of the things that I find very interesting is that most of us have no problem with extending grace to the people that we love or the people that we care about. When our friends are struggling with something, we might tell them, hey, you did the best that you could. Or when our child makes a mistake or our children makes mistakes, we don't tell them that they're a failure, but we remind them that the mistakes that they make are how they learn to grow from it, and how they learn to make better decisions in the future. Or maybe when someone that we care about is hurting, we don't criticize them, but we wrap them with love and compassion. But the difficult thing is that when we look in the mirror, all of a sudden, all that compassion, love, and grace that we give to everybody else, it disappears. And instead of us seeing that, we criticize ourselves. We replay our mistakes over in our minds, and we question every decision that we made. And we learn to convince ourselves that somehow we're the one person who doesn't deserve grace. As I was preparing for this conversation today, and I was thinking about this topic about self-compassion and self-forgiveness, anytime that I do a podcast episode, I always try to find myself in the conversation, because I too am in a space where I want to learn and where I want to grow. And I want to make sure that I see myself in these conversations that I have with you, because I also am not just speaking to you, but I'm speaking to myself first. And so what I realized something about myself as I prepare for this conversation. And what I realized is that there has been many seasons in my life where I had so much compassion for everyone else, but I didn't have any for myself. And I remember looking back on a decision that I made several years ago and thinking, how could I have been so naive? And why didn't I see the warning signs? And I found myself replaying that season over and over in my mind. I judged myself. I criticized myself. I carried embarrassment long after the situation was over. And then one day, I asked myself a question that completely changed my perspective. And I asked myself, if one of my friends came to me with this exact same story, would I respond to them the way I responded to myself? And the answer was absolutely not. I would have hugged my friend. I would have reminded them that they were doing a good job and they were doing the best that they could with what they knew how at the time. And I would have offered them words of encouragement. And I would have told them that that one season didn't define who they were. And then that's when it hit me. I had been giving grace to everyone except myself. And maybe you've been doing that too. And if you are that person that has been extending grace to everyone else, but not extending that same grace to yourself, and quietly suffering from guilt or shame because of those decisions, I want you to hear me when I say this, because I think one of the biggest things that we need to understand when we talk about guilt and shame that is associated with us not showing ourselves compassion and with us not forgiving ourselves is that there is a difference between guilt and shame, because they're not the same. Guilt says that I made a mistake, and shame says I am the mistake. That's a difference. Do you hear that difference? Guilt points to something that we did, and shame attacks who we believe that we are. And shame has a way of convincing us that one chapter has become the title of our entire story. But here's what I want you to remember. Everything that we've been through does not define who we are. What we have experienced does not define who we are. I had a conversation with one of my clients last week, and the topic of our conversation was surrounded around shame. And during that conversation, we were able to identify and connect how something that happened to that person in their life was connected to shame that they carry today, because their experience with shame started years ago when they were a kid. And so here's one thing that I want you to remember. Your divorce isn't your identity. Your addiction isn't your identity. Your childhood trauma isn't your identity. The things that you've experienced isn't your identity. Your financial struggles aren't your identity. That toxic relationship isn't your identity. Your worst decision that you've made in your life isn't your identity. Those are chapters in your story, not titles. And can I tell you something I've learned? When we spend so much time asking God to forgive us, we spend so much time hoping other people will forgive us. But sometimes the hardest person to receive forgiveness from is ourselves. We keep carrying something that God has already released, and we keep replaying something everyone else has stopped thinking about. We become prisoners of a sentence that we've already served because of guilt and shame, because we continue to carry that. And I wonder how many of us are missing out on peace because we're still arguing with the version of ourselves that no longer exists. That was heavy. That was a heavy thought, because a lot of us are missing out on peace because we're still arguing with the version of ourselves that no longer exists. I want you to think about the version of yourself who made the decision that you're still beating yourself up over. How old were you emotionally? What did you know then? What fears were you carrying? Were you lonely? Were you exhausted? Were you trying to keep your family together? Or were you simply just trying to survive? Because here's what I've learned. I've learned that it's easy to judge our past selves using the wisdom that we have today. But can I just say that that's not fair? That's not fair. The person you are today has knowledge of the younger version of you. But that person you are today, that younger version of you didn't have that knowledge. That person, the confidence that you have now, the younger version of you hadn't built that yet. The boundaries that you have now, or the boundaries that you're learning to have now, a younger version or a different version of you didn't have that because you hadn't learned that yet. And that version of you that is healing now and that is becoming, that didn't happen when you were younger. And the reason why I could say this is because I've had to learn this in my own life. I've had to stop looking back at my younger self with criticism and start looking back with compassion. And not even my younger self, but even different versions of me as I've grown and as I've matured, as I've been through relationships and experienced things. I've had to learn to look at my life and stop looking back at the things from the past with criticism and start looking back with compassion and forgiveness. Because the truth is that I wasn't trying, the younger version of me wasn't trying to ruin my life. The younger version of me and the younger version of you was simply just trying to survive it. And honestly, instead of us criticizing that version, and instead of me criticizing that version of me, I've learned to thank her. Because even when she made mistakes, she kept going. And she stayed in the room and got me to where I am today. She got me here. And maybe it's time for you to do the same thing. Maybe it's time for you to thank the younger version of yourself too. Because even amidst all the things that you've been through, that younger version or that different version of you is the version that got you here today. So, can I be honest with you? Some of us have become so comfortable with carrying guilt that we've mistaken it for responsibility. We've convinced ourselves that if we stop feeling guilty, we're somehow letting ourselves off the hook. But here's what I've learned. There is a difference between responsibility and allowing ourselves to be in prison. So if we look at responsibility, responsibility says, I'm going to learn from this. And then shame says, I'll live here forever. One of those things leads to growth and the other one keeps us stuck. And shame is the thing that keeps us stuck, which leads us to that imprisonment. So maybe today, as we're having this conversation, this is going to be a day that you stop living in a prison whose door has been unlocked for years. You've been in prison because you've allowed yourself to stay there, not because you couldn't get out of it, but because you didn't give yourself that grace and compassion that you deserve. So let's slow down for just a moment. And wherever you are in this moment, if you're driving, if you're at work, or if you're just listening in a space, if you're just sitting somewhere quietly, maybe even take a moment and just rest your feet on the ground. Square your shoulders back. And I want you to take a moment and maybe even close your eyes. I want you to take a slow breath. Breathe in and breathe out. And I want you to ask yourself, what am I still carrying? What memory still has power over me? What decision have I allowed to become my identity? Who would I be if I finally believed that I deserve grace too? Now, I want you to imagine the younger version of yourself standing in front of you right now. Maybe he or she's scared. Maybe he or she's ashamed. Maybe he or she's exhausted. Maybe he or she's doing everything they can just to make it through another day. Ask yourself, would you scream at her or him? Would you tell her or him she's worthless or he's worthless? Would you tell her or him that they'll never recover? Or would you wrap your arms around them? Would you tell her or him you didn't deserve everything that happened to you? You're going to make it. You are stronger than you know. You are still worthy. And if you could see yourself talking to that younger version of you, if you would extend that compassion to the younger version of yourself, why not extend it to the person you are today? Why not give yourself that compassion, that grace that you deserve as well? Because look, be honest with yourself. Self-forgiveness hasn't been a one-time event in anybody's life. It hasn't been a one-time event in my life. It's been a journey, and I'm still on that journey today. There are still times and still moments when I have to show myself grace and I have to show myself compassion. There are still moments when an old memory shows up unexpectedly in my mind. And for just a second, I cringe. But instead of letting shame take over, I've learned to pause. I've learned to tell myself, Niesha, you've already learned that lesson. You don't have to keep reliving it to prove that you've grown. You don't have to keep repenting and saying that you're sorry. You don't have to keep doing things that don't serve you anymore. That's what self-compassion looks like. It isn't pretending that the past didn't happen, but it's refusing to let the past have the final word in your life. So, if you've been waiting for permission to stop carrying shame, this is it. This is your moment. If you've been waiting for permission to stop carrying shame and stop carrying guilt, look, this is your moment. If you hear my voice, I want you to hear my voice loud and clear, because this is your moment. You are allowed to heal. Yes, you are allowed to laugh again. You are allowed to experience joy without feeling guilty. You are allowed to move forward. You are allowed to become someone your past wouldn't even recognize. And that isn't betrayal. That is healing. That is you becoming. That is you showing yourself compassion and forgiveness, which you deserve the same way that you give it to everybody else. So, before we end today's episode, I want to just leave you with something. And I want you to take a minute that after we have this conversation and you're done listening to this conversation, I want you to take a minute and I want you to grab a notebook or a journal or something to write on. And I want you to write down one thing that you've been holding against yourself. Just one. I don't want you to start going crazy and going down the rabbit hole thinking of so many different things. I just want you to grab one thing that you've been holding against yourself. Then underneath it, I want you to write that one thing, and then underneath it, I want you to answer these questions honestly. And I want you to be honest with yourself. Be vulnerable. Lean in. Lean into your truth. And I want you to ask yourself, what was I feeling during that season? What did I believe about myself then? What do I know now that I didn't know before? What would I say to a friend who had lived through the exact same experience? And then finally, I want you to write this sentence. I release the version of me who didn't know what I know today. I choose growth over guilt, compassion over shame, and healing over punishment. And I want you to read that out loud. I release the version of me who didn't know what I know today. I choose growth over guilt, compassion over shame, and healing over punishment. And I want you to recognize that as you say this, recognize that you're saying this not because everything will change overnight, but because healing often begins with the words we're willing to speak over ourselves. Healing begins when we acknowledge that something is there. However, we do the work to take the necessary steps to start becoming. And that includes the conversations that we have with ourselves and what we say to ourselves. So, I want you to remember something. Your mistakes are real. Your regrets may be real. Your pain is certainly real. But none of these things get to define your identity. You are not your worst decision. You are not your deepest wound. You are not your biggest regret. You are someone who is growing, someone who is healing, someone who is becoming, and that deserves compassion. Look, if today's episode and this conversation that we had today spoke to your heart, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to share it with someone who you know might need this reminder. Because sometimes we don't realize how many people are silently carrying shame until someone gives them permission to put it down. We don't know who's silently carrying guilt until somebody gives them permission to let it go. And if no one has told you this lately, let me be the one to say it. I believe in your ability to heal. I believe in your ability to grow. And most importantly, I believe that you deserve the same grace that you've been given everyone else. You deserve to forgive yourself for all of the things that you feel like you didn't do right, all of the regrets, all of the bad decisions. You deserve the same grace and compassion and forgiveness that you extend to everybody else. Look, y'all, this conversation was good to me because this is just a reminder. I just stopped in today to remind you that give yourself that same grace and compassion because you deserve it. Your past may have shaped you. Your experiences may have stretched you. But remember, we all have a story, and our stories are a part of our lives, and they explain us. They explain things about us. But our stories do not define who we are. I want to challenge you to do something this week. I know the last time we met together and we had a conversation, I challenged you. And I want to challenge you again. I want you to look in the mirror. I want you to look in the mirror this week. And I know it sounds very simple. However, I know how hard this could be. Just to look at yourself, to look at your reflection in the mirror. And I want you to look yourself in the eyes. And I want you to say, I forgive you. I know it may feel awkward. I know you might cry. And you may not even believe it the first time you say it. But I want you to say it anyway. And then I want you to tell yourself, you deserve peace. And I want you to remember that as you are doing this, I want you to remember healing begins when we stop introducing ourselves by our wounds and start recognize who we are becoming. Your story is a part of you, but it is not all of you. Your mistakes may have shaped you, but they don't get to name you. Your pain may have changed you, but it doesn't get to define your future. Because remember, the same way that pain has shaped you and has shaped your brain, healing can reshape you, and healing can reshape your brain as well. So here's your reminder. You deserve the same grace and compassion and forgiveness that you give to other people. Keep healing, keep growing, keep believing, and never forget that your story does not define you. If nobody has ever told you, or if nobody has ever validated you, I just want to say that you are doing a good job. You are doing a good job. You are resilient. You are stronger than what you think you are. Yes, life may have brought a lot of things to you. Yes, maybe you made some decisions that contributed to those things, but you are becoming. And you got this. You got this, and you can get through it. Remember, I love you. And if nobody else has said that to you, I love you, and tell yourself that you love you too. Extend that same grace and compassion and forgiveness that you give to everybody else because you deserve it. And until next time, I'll see you soon. Take care.